Hello everyone, and welcome to our webinar on ethics aimed at CFA preparation. Our speaker today is Mark. He's a consultant and a finance professor. Mark is an associate professor of finance at ICN Business School and independent consultant and trainer to asset management firms, institutional investors and financial regulators. He specializes in the identification and implementation of best practices in the investment profession, research and portfolio construction processes, client marketing and servicing, corporate culture and organization, staff training and motivation. In today's session, he will speak about ethics and will help you all CFA Level 1 candidates. Now, in case of any questions, please type it out in the questions box you must be able to see in the panel. Mark will take it up in the webinar. Otherwise, you can post it on our forum. Simply log on to edupristine.com where you can go inside the forum for free, and our experts, internal experts, in-house experts and external experts will be on it. They'll be working on your doubts and will get back to you as soon as possible. Now I'll ask Mark to take it up from here. Mark, you can start the webinar.
Hello, yes. Good afternoon. India, I believe. I'm speaking right now from Paris, so we're getting towards lunch. It's cold here. I hope it's better weather where you're listening. On the other hand, I am really sorry that there seems to be some drilling or some other type of work going on in the apartment just above me, and maybe you'll have to bear with a little bit of background noise, for which I sincerely apologize. We're going to spend an hour together talking about ethics, okay? So I'll be doing much of the talking, but please send me your questions anytime they come up to your mind. We'll be going through what is a little bit specific about ethics within the CFA program and what, from my experience, I have encountered on the students' side in terms of particular nervousness, perhaps, when dealing with the ethics section. So essentially what I'd like to say is, if it boils down to just one little sentence, is keep cool. It's not that difficult. It's very, very difficult, on the other hand, to do a very bad job in ethics, okay? So ethics is, yes, fairly challenging, and we'll be talking together about how to get the most out of it. But please, don't consider that this is something so specific that it should make you nervous in any way, okay? So let's start off, okay? There is something rather specific about ethics when you enter the CFA program, and it's all part of what the CFA designation is about and what the general policy of the CFA Institute has been since inception. The CFA Institute wants to bring up the CFA Charter as a badge of excellence, both in terms of knowledge, know-how, and practical professionalism, but as well in terms of mindset and capacity to make the difference between what is the client's best interest and what may be something which is going to be, let's say, the grayer area, what is often considered the way that salesmanship should operate, specifically in the field of finance. Between ourselves, and unfortunately I'll have to be a little bit off color, this is what most people will call bullshit, okay? The fine line is rather complicated. So this is why probably the CFA Institute has been always very vocal in the way that it emphasizes ethics. So the Board of Governors has instituted a policy which is absolutely official, requiring candidates and members to place a particular emphasis on ethics in the way that they behave, in the way that they talk about the CFA designation, and the overall ethical program has always been taken with the most important consideration, okay? So one of these aspects, perhaps, although it's honestly a very minor issue, is to say that, yes, indeed, ethics section within the CFA program, the study program, and the way that the CFA tests are graded, has a rather particular format. Why? Well, because it's been now 8 years that the ethics section has been considered with somewhat of a particular and very specific approach. What has been said is that while all points being granted to candidates are always positive and can compensate one another between sections, the ethics section grade is considered independently, and that an ethics adjustment, which can be either positive or negative, may weigh in assessing the candidate's final result, and hence it's a pass or fail grade, okay? This has been said, it's true. Now what follows is what my reading of it should be. First of all, once we've said that, we've said it all. There is no way to understand precisely how this positive or negative specific grade on the ethics section will weigh in. There is no information regarding what the pass grade was in the past or should be or is. No one knows that, okay? It's defined by a special committee, and it's a very secretive information. Furthermore, I would say, I mean, the way that the ethics adjustments operate is also just about a secret, so there's nothing that you can do about it. It's just something that you can know in the back of your mind, okay? You more nervous. On the contrary, I think it's very counterproductive. Why? Because what's really important with ethics, I think, is that it should make you more self-confident, okay? You should assess your general level of whether or not you'll be able to make through the CFA program in what is your general feeling when you deal with ethics. It is true that in some way, I would say, it's a telltale. If candidates feel very nervous about ethics, there's something wrong with them. It's not that they don't get ethics. It's that they understand the general question format in that section will probably be difficult for them to address because it's all-encompassing and it works on a general approach, I would say. Not once again something which was going to weigh your heart or the way that you approach difficult questions with an ethical compass. That's fairly easy, I would say, once again, to fake, okay? So that's not the question. The question is not getting it, not understanding what's going on. And if you don't get it, it means that, yes, you don't have the professional capacity to understand these kind of little case studies which are presented to you in the ethics section. So once again, if you have worked in the other sections, ethics is going to come rather naturally, and the ideal way for you to deal with ethics is to be as relaxed as possible and to be as confident as possible. But once again, if it's not the case, most probably what's going to happen is that you should work out the overall program and not only ethics. Ethics is just like finishing school, and we'll come back to that. Part of the issue is that ethics comes in first in the program and should actually, to some extent, be worked upon as a last, okay, section. So here you're like a few weeks ahead of your test, and it's now time, I would say, for you to be able to assess your overall planning regarding ethics. And once again, it's a way for you to self-program you in being relaxed when you address the test program, okay? In order to move forward in this direction, I'd like to convey the idea that the CFA Institute is a very fair grader. The system which has been put in place is to be trusted, okay? What the CFA Institute wishes to assess is whether you have the general culture, whether you have an understanding of the major concepts, okay? They don't care too much sometimes some questions are in this general area, but they don't care about your short-term memory, okay? They don't want you to know whether it's section 3 or 2 of the Code and Standards which is referred to, okay? They want you, on the other hand, to understand how to prioritize issues and how to understand from a case which major concepts are at work. Okay, so please consider that the grading process is done in a way which will make fair calls upon your general capacity. They're not trying to trap you, okay? It's not a honest assessment of whether or not you understand it, the question, whether you get it or not, okay? So, if you talk to past candidates, it's very difficult to find candidates who will consider that they were not treated in a fair way. Some may consider that they were not lucky. That may be found. But some who say that they deserve to pass and were not accepted are very hard to find. So please trust yourself, trust the program, and regarding ethics overall, consider it as a finishing school which tests you in more or less real-life template situations to apply the general rules that you were taught. And here again, I will quote Thomas Jefferson. It's not very clear whether he was the man who said this. I'm a great believer in luck, but I find that the more I work and the more I have of it. So the only thing, once again, is to review the overall test material, okay, and spend some time indeed on ethics, not to learn by heart anything. You may lose a few points by not having learned by heart how long you need, for instance, to keep material, whether they're electronic format or traditional format. That's not very important. Such questions gradually disappear. The only question is, when you read this case, do you understand what's going on? Do you understand why some actors may be torn apart between two different types of direction, their self-interest or their wish to convey an idea which is not a pure representation of the truth? And what is the client's best interest, which is to have an honest assessment of everything which is going on? So the candidates are nervous about this ethics section, as I told you, first of all, because it's important, it's been stressed upon quite a few times. It's one of the first time, most often, except for some MBA students, that ethics has been encountered in the course of studies. But more importantly, perhaps, because the way that the questions are phrased are quite unusual. If you look at the way questions in the multiple choice exam can be phrased, some are conceptuals, okay? What they ask is general questions as to broad understanding of concepts, okay, and definitions, okay, and the way that they should be applied. Ethics can relate to that to some extent, but especially in the first level, they're rarely of that type because the concepts are rather fuzzy and not always very easy actually to identify in a clear way, so the testable material is complicated. Calculation questions are typically the questions that many candidates, even though they dislike them, they like them to some extent because they're very clear. They know what they need to do. Okay? So here, it's an exercise. You just need to compute. You need to remember what the formula should be, and eventually there's this sort of a first step and then a second step so that it's not all that trivial. But anyway, it doesn't require a lot of conceptual thinking. Last element, okay, is the questions where some type of critical assessment of the situation needs to be done, okay, where there are different pieces which need to be brought together in order to come up to a synthetic solution. We'll see that this is mostly what is done in ethics. At level 1, it's just trying to easily identify what is the most important issue. Level 2 will go into the finer print, and level 3 will have sometimes to move forward into such conflicts in order to ensure that there is a procedure worked out which can structurally address the question. Okay? So level 1, most often, the question is rather clear-cut. It's not a question of different shades of gray, although obviously for the question to be challenging, it needs to appear a little bit this way. But in the grader's mind, and in the way that the question has been designed, it is supposed to be a little bit more than shades of gray. It's supposed to be a fairly clear-cut black or white decision, wherein you'll be able to assess what is the prime determinant. What is the procedure? What is the question which is being asked for you? So you need to have sort of this second sense wherein you start reading the question and you say, uh-oh, I know what I'm being tested about. They want to know whether I understand this concept. You may sometimes, unfortunately, get it wrong, but that's the type of attitude which is required from you. So these questions, once again, of the third kind, to some extent can be worked out for people or candidates who have not worked a lot and who rely mostly on their common sense. There are some candidates who want only to learn what they can master and understand and rely much more on their capacity to analyze rather than on their memory. For them, ethics typically is not all that difficult, and it's a little bit unfortunate, once again, when I see some candidates who are nervous about ethics because it is for those who would like to know everything by heart. Okay, ethics is not about that. Okay, it's a little bit about that sometimes, unfortunately. I would say unfortunately, but mostly it isn't. So what is it about? The way that a good ethics question needs to be phrased, a presentation of a case study, which is a sort of archetypal situation that you need to have encountered. You need to have encountered it how? Well, if you don't have a track record of your own as a professional in the field of finance, sometimes it's a little bit complicated. And I do recommend my students to watch movies about finance or to do as much as possible video viewing on YouTube, on documentaries, etc., so that they understand what is at stake, what are the past scandals, etc., and to read the press, obviously. Not because it relates directly to the CFA course of study, but indirectly it makes them understand why people sometimes act in an unethical situation, okay, or at least the attitude. The other thing behind that is to have a clear understanding of the incentives, the business models of each and every participant in the capital markets. It's important to understand who's being paid on a commission basis and therefore has an interest to churn the account, the broker. It's important to understand who has an interest to showcase his performance, okay, the asset manager, the investment advisor, okay, and there again, perhaps exchanges, because today there's a competition on exchanges, okay, so is there perhaps some kind of pump priming approach regarding liquidity and things like that. So there again, if we move back to ethics and the candidates, more and more I see very young candidates straight out of college. They have limited work experience, and what these little case studies refer to is very, very foggy in their mind. For some other more experienced candidates, sometimes they have a problem And why? Because in finance, they're quite often very specialized in a position, and they have a hard time zooming backwards and understanding there are many different types of situations. And or they have the attitude of saying, hang on, I know how things are done, and then this fairly generic way of presenting them in the CFA program is a challenge to them because they have a much more practical. The correct way is somewhere in the middle. You need to understand what it refers to, but once again, these case studies are fairly elliptical in the way that they're presented, and they're supposed to be archetypal situation. What I mean by that is that they're very generic, okay? So don't move into the specifics. Clearly, things could be always much more complicated. There's always a way of imagining how things could be different. But the way that you will find the correct solution is to say, okay, this is what they want to test. They want to test whether I understand this concept. This is why they've presented it this way. And the best solution, clearly, for me to show this is A, B, or C. That's the way you should do it, okay? So with all that being said, okay, let's further into ethics. Just to remind you, it's obviously a question of being a little bit nervous because it's a big section, obviously, and it's going to continue. So that's something which actually can be seen on a lighter side, if you wish. The fact of the matter is that everything that you do here in Level 1 will be continued in Level 2 and Level 3, and thereafter, once you will be a CFA charter holder. Okay, so ethics is a long-term commitment, and when you keep that in your mind, you'd better like it, okay? Because it's not only something that you need to just learn and forget, it's something that you will. So if you think of it this way, you'll get to the crux of the matter and think about the major principles first. Level 2 and Level 3 will be more and more addressed in details at Level 2 and policy issues at Level 3. I've put here and a few information which I found on the web, and I'm actually quite sure they should be taken with a pinch of salt, but it's rather funny, if you wish, that on Level 1, ethics is among the sections which are, some people find the least challenging and some people find the most challenging, okay? So it seems to be a fairly big divide, which to some extent will support the view that I've just I've just exposed, at least, regarding the way that different categories of students view ethics in a different way. In a nutshell, I would say that the lazy students think that they will always be able to sort of work their way out of ethics, and the very committed students who want to know the most and the most and the most find it's a difficult challenge, I would say, to get all the points in ethics, and they continue and continue losing a few points, and therefore find it rather challenging because they don't know exactly how to find their way to the perfect score that they dream about. Okay. In Level 2, there's much more of a sort of consensus that it is challenging rather than not. Okay. And regarding Level 3, then things get easier. But if we just move back to Level 2, I'd like to say that, okay, don't make matters more complicated than they need to be at Level 1. At Level 2, you will get into details, don't worry, okay? But keep the best for the next year, okay? That's when you'll really need to get into the fine print of things. At this level, Level 1, we want only to understand whether you get the big picture, okay? Level 3, you don't worry. If you went through Level 1 and 2, 3 is going to be rather easy, okay? So, it's a pretty big chunk. It's true that if you really fail ethics, you could be in a pickle. But there again, I'd like to sort of downplay this a little bit. It's going to be very difficult to be very bad in ethics, okay? Because whatever, you always have some common sense. You always know, you've worked, etc. It's going to work out well. And in all honesty, my view is that ethics is not that discriminant, if you wish, that most candidates succeed pretty much in the same way, while some other subjects are much more discriminant. Those who have not studied properly FRA will not do well, and it's a big section as well. Okay, so it's been promoted. Okay, it's the first section, and most of the time, because candidates start with ethics, it gives them a little bit of a bad first impression, because they're taken and with sort of when they're all cold, and it makes all sorts of reference to issues and professionalism that they don't understand very well. But please, now that you're close to your exam, forget about whatever your first impressions were and move towards this exam with the confidence which you should have, okay? So, now, everything is as important. The main thing in ethics is professionalism, which actually refers to everything else you've learned, okay? And professionalism is necessary to understand what ethics is all about. So we went through the different levels. I won't recapitulate on this and rehash it. Your answers need to be commensurate with what is expected from you. Don't go too far. Don't put additional stress on yourself. So, how do we work out a question in ethics? There are all sorts of ways, and now it's a bit late, I would say, for you to change your way, but most obviously your best friend is your pen, okay? And when you read, you need to find in this little case study what are the key words, okay, in the narrative which evoke a well-known ethical issue, okay? Sometimes it will evoke two, okay? If that is the case, then you'll need to be able to prioritize, which is a subsection, okay? But the first issue is for you to understand what is going on, okay? Who is the actor? What is he subject to? And what kind of conflict is he into, okay? Then, immediately, some time of general principle will pop up to your mind explaining what's going on. The understanding of these case studies will come in gradually, and I suggest that you sort of rub your shoulders if they seem very abstract in nature and you don't understand what's going on, okay? Try talking to friends who are in the field of finance or to CFA charter holders, okay? Or obviously, address EduPristine for assistance, okay, which I will try to do in the last section, okay? But here again, try to raise yourself to put some flesh around these case studies so that they are ingrained and that you sort of live through them as much as possible, okay? Once that has been done, most often the answer will be a low-hanging fruit. It will not always be the case, and I will be frank, I always do my classes with my students without knowing the question, okay, which is the real way, obviously, to address them. And I fall in traps, and I cannot claim to have 100% in ethics. But to be frank, I don't think anyone can, okay? Sometimes you make mistakes because you're distracted, and then you need to understand what is this distractor, okay? But if you aim for a good grade, which is 80%, 90%, okay, where I think I will probably land, you've got it made, and that's good, okay? But there will always be, unfortunately, in every section, a few points which will drop off. I'm sorry. That's the way it works. We try at the CFA Institute to be always as up to standards as we would like to in terms of the grading process, but it's not always that easy to do exactly what I've told you, which is to test the candidate's broad knowledge and not their capacity to amass trivia for a short-term basis, okay? So most often you'll will know what the problem is. Most often the solution to be chosen will be the strictest solution, but obviously not always. You need to understand when such a strict solution would entail very unreasonable consequences. This is where things can be a little bit thorny, and there again, I apologize, but it's quite possible that you will lose a few points. So for all these reasons, okay, sections on ethics need to be addressed in a sort of a softer way, okay? While you can work on flashcards and everything, okay, because your memory will be asked to work a lot in many other sections, although understanding is always important, obviously, okay? Ethics requires both a cultural understanding of what's going on, which to some extent is better if you've lived through it, and to have a proper mindset, okay, if you wish. I'm not talking motherly in terms of doing good, etc., but to having a correct attitude towards cases wherein your ethical compass will be challenged. Just understanding what is at stake, okay? So, yes, to some extent you can do a little bit of sort of memory drill and learning by heart, but most of the time if you do that, and the more you do that, the more maybe it will create a feeling of anxiety and of not mastering the section completely. So take a relaxed view, sort of downplay to some extent. It's not all that important. Obviously it's important, but can you aim to have 100% in any section? I'm not sure. So a few points, it's not all that bad. You'll have an excellent grade, I'm quite certain, okay? So do view it as a specific section. Do view it in a relaxed way and with an approach which says, I can do it, okay? I understand what's going on and I know how to understand how to apply the major concepts which have been taught in this section. Don't aim for 100%. If you don't get something, do an informed choice, okay? And lastly, always think ethics, okay? Ethics is not something that you can fake. Don't view it as sort of being an angel. View it as being an honest individual. And this switch needs to be on all the time. It's not a question of, yeah, I'm in the ethics section, so I'm going to change my mindset, okay? This is a little bit stressful as well, okay? Don't view ethics, once again, as asking something which is unreasonable from you. It's just being a good professional. End of story. Once again, downplay your ambitions a little bit, but have them with you all the time in order for you to live with them, okay? So, one of the issues that you will see, obviously, is that everything that you learn in the CFA program, to some extent, is based on models. And models always bring in this famous expression, which is garbage in, garbage out. A model, in a way, is a rhetorical exercise which enables you to prove just about anything. And thereafter say that, yeah, well, financial analysis is just another form of sophistry, okay? It's just a way of sort of packaging what you had already decided should be the output and proving that it should be done. It's all reverse engineering anyway. I'll be frank, as a professional, sometimes that's the way things work out. But it's very unrewarding for everyone. So what we're talking about here in ethics is doing things the right way, assessing what the inputs should be, okay, that is to assess them in the clearest way. If you don't know, then not eventually, well, at least trying to do without them or trying to assess them in a non-biased way, let's put it this way, at least understanding where you could eventually be biased in the input, and then working out your model in an honest way. Not from the output, but from the input downwards towards the output. That's what ethics is about again. Okay? But you should not be that naive about it. Yes, models Formal models are there to help you think. And if your mindset, if the way you think is twisted or biased, you'll use the model, and the model will be used correctly. But at the end of the day, it will be a perverse use of the model. So this is, there again, another way of thinking about ethics, is that ethics are supposed to, yes, work and give sense to your model so that they move correctly in the direction towards the price formation processes. A few topics, and then we'll move into the question zone. Okay? Very clearly, you are taught initially that the CFA program aims for higher standards. What does that mean? It means that in an international concept or context where a number of different national laws and the CFA standards apply, the CFA charter holder or candidate who is subject to the CFA standard should apply the strictest law. So anyone who has done a little bit of law studies, it's a very weak concept. It doesn't really cut ice very much. Okay? So there again, if you are a specialist, you might find this rather confusing. Why? Well, because laws, legal structures are sometimes very different, and to say what is the strictest perhaps doesn't mean much of anything, because the general economy of the law is different, okay? So what should I say? Except for the fact that here at CFA Level 1, consider this general principle of applying the strictest law as, well, understand what we would like to say, that we aim for the best standards, okay? But if you are an international lawyer, I'm sorry to say it's not going to work out very well, okay? So don't go any further than just this general principle. Level 2 will dig it a little bit deeper, but in all honesty, there's very limited jurisprudence as to what this really means and how it should be applied. Regarding allocation of trades, for instance, that's going to be something that you will be questioned quite a lot about. The question here is that you need to make a distinction between what is fair, equitable, okay, and what is equal. What is equal does not mean much. We don't know whether it's equal in terms of actually dollar or currency amount or in percentage terms, okay. What needs to be done is that it needs to be fair, equitable. In a way, you can always revert to this old traditional way of what is ethical. What is ethical is what you would easily be able to communicate to third parties without feeling ashamed, okay? If you've worked out a fair, equitable way of allocating trades, it's going to be acceptable. It does not need to be equal. Insider's information. Obviously, this is the course section, okay? There again, if you want to move deeper into this section, you'll find yourself in a conundrum which is rather complicated, okay? What is material? Material means, well, if everyone knew this information and took effect and took action upon it, okay, then probably the price would be different. What is non-public? Well, what's a non-public? It means it's not been incorporated in the evaluation process. Okay? So here we've got something which is a little bit redundant to some extent. Okay? We need to find something, okay, which is material, non-public. That is, it's not been taken to the evaluation process, and if it would be taken to the evaluation process, it would change the price. But if we really look at things in this context, how are we going to prove it? How can we know whether a piece of information has not been taken into account in the evaluation process? Okay. The other thing is, how could we know that if it would be taken to the evaluation process, it would have an effect on price? There's no way of playing life a few different times, you know. It's not a lab. Okay. So all of that is based on a judgmental assessment, okay? And it's obviously your judgment. Your level 1, okay, your judgment is going to be done on very clear-cut issues. We won't be dealing into areas where you can have paradoxes, such as it's a rumor, the source would perhaps make it immaterial because it's not something which is of a very high confidence in terms of the materiality of who is the issuer of the news. But at the same time, we are in a particular phase of the market where rumors have an effect on price, which happens quite often, I must say. So you've got these issues regarding insider information on journal editors of heard in the street type of rumors, okay? How do you disseminate rumors for journalists, etc.? I mean, there are issues here that you need to think about just so that you muscle your brain a little bit on these sort of marginal cases. But please remind that you will not be tested on these gray areas. It's going to be a fairly clear-cut issue. The second paradox to some point is the fact that if you are a good financial analyst, what you're paid for is to find exactly what is you're prohibited to deal on. You're supposed to find some kind of material information which is non-public, because if everything you find is public or immaterial, well, you're not doing a very great job as an analyst, okay? So you will have questions sometimes which are a little bit paradoxical in nature, such as you do your homework and you interview, I don't know, providers, distributors, etc., and you come up with a big piece of information. What can you do about it? At this level, level 1, just apply the test. If it's material and it's non-public, don't deal with it. On the other hand, well, sometimes you will be tested, it's difficult to test, okay, on the understanding of what is the mosaic theory. We should not shoot ourselves in the foot too much as financial analysts. So our job is to piece together different pieces of information, okay, which are in each and every one of them either immaterial or public, and by putting them together create a general picture wherein we will have a material, non-public piece of information, which is what we're bringing to the client in terms of our advisory service. It's a complicated issue, and some countries actually in their regulatory process have considered that it should not be sold to clients, but should be open to the general public, okay, which creates obviously a problem regarding the business model on which financial research is being based on. So I'm bringing this to the forefront, but it should, in your minds, remain in the background, okay? The general issue, I suggest you really understand and chew around this concept, if you wish, around this bone of insider information, so that you understand, okay, that it's a complicated issue in fact, but also at the same time, remind yourself that you will be tested on fairly clear-cut situations. In terms of the duty of loyalty to the employer, you'll always be tested on this as well, okay, and please understand that your work contract will extend, and with the work contract will comes your duty of loyalty. You cannot take anything which is the employer's property, and here sometimes the quote-unquote traps may be inducing you to believe that what you're taking away has no value to your employer because he's abandoned this model, he's abandoned this segment of the market, etc., and then therefore that it's a sort of a, not really a crime because no one is being harmed. No, that's not the way to work it out. There again, okay. If it's really so harmless, well, you might as well do it openly, and here comes the important level. Why did you not do it openly, okay? Why did you do it without warning your client, your employer? Okay, if you want to take away a model, okay, address it first front, and don't think twice about it. Okay, don't take anything. Now, regarding third-party research, that's a little bit of a complicated issue. It needs to be disclosed. It needs to be considered both on a personal as well as an institutional level, and there's a necessity from the purchaser of the research who is redistributing it to analyze the overall process and to run regular audits on the way that the research process is undertaken. There again, in my experience, there's been some different approaches from India, because I know that there's a lot of outsourcing from larger firms towards Indian firms, which is not always recognized, and that's part, unfortunately, of the business model, okay? So there, don't shoot yourself in the foot too much, or at least if you do while taking the exam, don't worry. I mean, once again, this is between yourself and the CFA Institute grader, okay, which is meaning really it's computers. And you can, to some extent, bend your way of understanding your business model if necessary when you take the exam, okay? Sometimes I know that some Wall Street firms do not want the actual writer of the report to be mentioned. That's what, in theory, would be required by the CFA Institute, and we had a long discussion on this, but you will not be tested on this. Don't worry. Okay. Last element, best execution. Okay. There is a very complicated subject today, so don't get into the fine print again. The CFA Institute goes half of the way. It does not consider that best execution should be done on a case-by-case basis. You're not subject to an obligation of providing best execution every time, considering also the implicit costs. But you're considered as liable of offering a best execution general service, which means that you need to have put in place a process which is fair, equitable, and which is designed to be in the client's best interest. If you use soft dollar arrangements, they need to be disclosed, and whatever investment service you've received needs to be taken in for the client's best interest. So, not that complicated, and there again, if you are an expert, please don't use your expertise at level 1, okay? Keep it dry and as stupid simple as possible, okay? So that finishes my presentation. I hope I wasn't too lengthy. I'm more than happy to take in questions, and I'm expecting them from on the line. So if I don't have any questions, I mean, we're 10 minutes short from the end. I will leave you there.
Hi, Mark. Thank you so much for the really informative session. I'm sure the students must have drawn a lot of benefits from the same.
Fine. Should we just shut off here?
Yeah, I think a few of them have posted some questions. There's a question from Srujan Eki saying that, is GIPS tested?
Okay, yes, GIPS is not tested. I did not mention GIPS, but there again, GIPS, so Global Investment Performance Standard, which succeeded the so-called AIMR, previously the CFA Institute Performance Presentation Standard, needs to be completely understood. Yes, indeed. What is most important is for every candidate to understand why GIPS was set up. Okay, so there you start off with what would happen if you didn't have GIPS? How would you pitch your performance? Well, it's very simple. You would go to the middle office and you would say, okay, I'm trying to make a presentation on Indian equity, Indian value, whatever, okay? What is your best performing account? And you would take that account. And then walking back to your desk, you would say, well, hang on, maybe I can make that even better if we would start the track record at this date, because initially it was not that good. And you would showcase the best period on your best account, and, well, what would that imply? It would imply that when you would meet with the client, you would show him the best of the best of the best, but not the average. So that's what GIPS is about. You need to show your client the average performance of all the portfolios over the entire course of your management of that investment management capacity. And for that purpose, you will create a composite. The composite needs to be structured in a very clear way. If you understand that, and you understand what entails from that general drive, you've got 80% done with GIPS. Okay? Understand who is being serviced, what is the general purpose, how does it work, okay? Unfortunately, I must say that sometimes you will have a few trivia questions on how GIPS carve-outs, for instance, are done, or issues regarding leverage, or some technical issues which need to be learned by heart, unfortunately. But please, every time you do anything on ethics, you need to sort of put a little bit of flesh around it, understand what's going on, and what the general drive is. So anyway, the real question is, yes, the answer to the question is you will be tested on GIPS. Very important. What is important with GIPS also to understand is that GIPS is a voluntary standard. If you do not claim compliance to GIPS, you're not subject to GIPS. Very easy. But if you claim your GIPS, then you're all GIPS. You cannot be 50% GIPS or I'm GIPS compliant except this. Okay, so it's black or white. So GIPS, yes, that was one question. Now let me look at the other questions. Okay.
And Mark, students want to ask what are the kind of questions that are expected on GIPS?
Questions on GIPS are mostly issues such as Mr. or Mrs. So-and-so works in this firm, okay, and then it's like they do something, and please tell us what is wrong, or what is least wrong, or what is worse, okay, and what they've done. In order to understand this, once again, you need to understand what the general principles of GIPS are, and where did they go astray. Most often it's going to be that. Sometimes, under that format, or under a much more direct format, you'll be taken into the finer print of GIPS. But most often, once again, the general format for ethical questions is a little bit of a scenario, if you wish.
All right, and Ramesh here wants to ask that who can use CFA Level 1 candidate designation? The one who passed Level 1 exam, or the one who is writing the exam?
Okay, so there again, I've sidestepped this piece of the ethics section, which is very much highlighted by the CFA Institute, but honestly is very boring. Okay, so how do you use the designation? You need to use it in a dignified way, which means that you cannot brag so much about your CFA designation. Okay, fair enough. Okay, well, I won't get into the detail, but the only thing that you really need to know is that the only way to use the CFA designation is to be a CFA charter holder. Okay, there again, you cannot say, I'm a CFA Level 1, for instance. If that's the way that the question has been phrased, it doesn't mean anything. I'm not a CFA Level 1. It's not a designation. It's not a charter. It's nothing, okay? What you can very easily say, and which employers will recognize, is I passed CFA Level 1. I'm registered for CFA Level 2. This is a fact, and you can always state facts, but there is no CFA Level 1 designation, CFA Level 2 designation, CFA Level 3 designation. These are not designations, they're not charters, and either you are a CFA charter holder or you're not. In the interim, you are, okay, a candidate, you're studying for your CFA designation, great. And it's very important, yes, in your curriculum to state the facts, and nothing more than the facts.
I think, Mark, that would have been very useful to the students.
Is that clear?
I think it must be. If any of the students have any other doubts, you can post it on our forum by logging into our website, or you can mail the same to shreyans@eneve.com, which can be spelled as SHREYANS @ENEEV.com. If you have any other queries, kindly mail the same to me or post it on the forum, and our experts will get back to you as soon as possible. Now, one more thing that I would like to talk to you guys about is we are selling mind maps. You can buy them on our website at a very, very discounted price, a highly discounted price. So either you can just log on to our website and go through it and buy it from there, or you can just mail your details to me, and I can probably take it forward from there. So I think that for it, Mark, would you like to say something else?
No, I just want you, once again, I wish you the best of luck, and I'm quite certain that things are going to work out well. Regarding ethics, once again, please tone it down. Please look at it as a fun piece, okay, which is not asking the impossible in any way. It's just asking you to be exactly what you are. So don't try to change yourself for ethics.